why don't we do this? Why don't we start from the very beginning? And you know what? You're right, Art. Having a work comp injury submitted during a work comp webinar would probably not
Not
be the
be,
best way to get started.
yeah, that wouldn't be good.
Yeah, yeah. So here's what we're going to do. We'd like to take some time and give everybody a lay of the land today. Gonna make sure that we respect everyone's time. We know that this is scheduled to go until 1 p.m. We may end up ending just a few minutes early. We certainly do at the very end want to leave time for some questions and answers as well. So we'll be sure to take some time and do that. And I am working here to get my slides to catch up with the prompt commands here. So bear with me just a moment. We'll be able to get things kicked off here. Art and Dan, I'm going to assign both of you as slide control participants as well. There we go. Now we're caught up. Thanks for your patience during the technical difficulties there. One of the things that we want to make sure to do is just give everybody a quick view of where we're going today, and again, still be able to end on time. We want to be sure to help everybody understand at a very high level what we're talking about. We talk about kept on salary. We also then want to be able to really take a deeper dive into some of those things that we'll talk about first at a high level flyover view. And then also want to let everybody know how this has really played out within our group and the members that we serve for work comp claims management. And then, like I mentioned before, leave some time for Q&A at the end. So do have your keyboards ready. And a couple of you have messaged that we have the mute function on. That's on intentionally for now, but we will give everybody an opportunity to chime in during the Q&A towards the end of the webinar. And we'll leave everybody muted and video off right up until that time. So do have your keyboards ready for the Q&A towards the end. Art and Dan, I'm still having a little bit of a lag here. There we go. Feel free to grab control there if this continues, but wanted to make sure that everybody knows just a little bit about who we are as Vigilant. If you don't already, we recognize that we've got both member companies as well as non-members joining us today. And the first thing that we want people to know is that we've been doing this as an employer association since 1960. We've been serving work comp in Washington State since about 1984. This is year 40 for us. And if there's one thing that I would say that really helps to, I think, clarify and set apart what we do at Vigilant is that we are known for the service that we provide. We're passionate about it, and it really does show. So we're really, really excited to be able to tell you just a little bit more about one specific area of that service. We focus on employment law, safety, and workers' compensation primarily, and obviously today we'll be focused on the work comp portion of things.
Just to add an explanation to that, since 1960, that's almost as long as I've been here. So, wow, that's a long time.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, one of the questions that arose in our minds, and I'm sure probably in your minds as well, is that we wanted to really understand what prompted this discussion. Why is it that we chose this topic? There's a lot of things that we could have been talking about, especially within the world of work comp and Washington labor and industries. And really, where this conversation came from, it was born out of conversations that we have been having both with our members and with the marketplace in general as well. So again, we recognize there are both of you represented here on this call. But what we primarily want to do is to help really demystify some of the questions that are around kept on salary. What we found is that when it comes to policy making and decision making with kept on salary, there's oftentimes a lot of confusion. Sometimes there's a little bit of fear. And what that has led to is decision making that sometimes can feel very randomized, based on just perceived value or certain length of time. What we've also seen through conversations, especially with others in the marketplace, is that there are some retro groups, some third-party administrators that actually have some mandates in place with regards to the use of kept on salary, which ultimately are not helpful on an employer by employer basis. So we'll want to be sure to talk about that as well. So having said all that, what we'll do is take just a few minutes here to do kind of a 30,000-foot flyover, and then we'll take a deeper dive as well. So when we think about kept on salary, we want to start with the big picture of Washington labor and industries. And what you'll see here on this slide, and there's a lot going on here, I confess. We're not going to go through each of these boxes, but what you'll see here is that all of the boxes with the black text, there's a key at the bottom, represent everything that Washington labor and industries controls. You also see in the green text everything that we as a third-party administrator can control, and then in the orange text everything that you as an employer can control. And so what's the point? Well, the point is that you see a lot of black text on this page. What does that tell us? That tells us that Washington Labor and Industries is actually in control of quite a bit. So what do we want to understand? Well, we want to understand where we, as your third-party administrator, can help you positively affect change in your favor. There may not be a lot of orange or a lot of green on this page, but for the orange and the green that's there, the things that we can control together, those levers are powerful. And one of those powerful levers is kept on salary. So that's why we wanted to highlight this for you, because as we go through today, there's going to be a common theme. And that common theme is, what does L&I control? What do we control? What do you as the employer control? And how can we partner together to affect those control levers in a way that's really going to benefit you? So Art, I don't know about you. This slide kind of gives me a little bit of a headache. Dan, are you there with me?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really jumps out to me when we look at kind of this outline, right, and this screen is that we don't necessarily have to like the rules of the game, but we've got to understand what they are so that we can go win in the areas where we can and help our member companies do that too. And so this level of complexity is overwhelming, but knowing how each lever affects outcomes for our member companies is really important. And of course, for today, we'll focus on how the KOS lever affects outcomes, and that'll really be pretty impactful.
Absolutely. And we're more than likely going to have other lunch and learns on those other subjects, but let's talk about KOS today.
Yes, we'll tackle what we can while we can.
You know what, folks? You probably you don't need us to tell you, but the cards are stacked against you. And basically, I've given you some RCWs there. I just want you to know that the Washington Workers' Comp statute's been liberally construed in favor of the injured worker. No surprise there. But that being said, there are great opportunities for employers, and there's great tools. And one of those is kept on salary. And you can go ahead and read the RCW if you choose to. I'll sort of do the translation for you in a nutshell. It's an option you have to continue paying your injured workers their wages and benefits while they're off work. And this basically stops labor and industries from paying time loss compensation or some indemnity. Indemnity is a bad word. It's the main driver in the cost in any claim, and it's the main success or failure in a retro program. So the state does give us the opportunity as employers to go ahead and pay those wages. So it's a great opportunity for you folks to utilize the tool. Again, knowing that the Department of Labor and Industries and the state has put their stamp of approval on it, there also is a benefit to, guess what, the injured worker. It certainly benefits them. And for that matter, it also benefits retro programs. The caveat, and that's what we're going to talk about here today, is it does benefit the employer. However, there's a law of diminishing returns, and we're going to talk about that. KOS requirements. No surprise that the state has put lots of rules of what is and what isn't kept on salary. I've heard so many employers talk to me and say, "Oh, well, we have an injured worker. He's got great PTO. We'll just go ahead and give him PTO, or we have sick time, or we've got this, or we've got that." And the reality of it is, no, the department will not allow it unless it is full wages and or salary and benefits. So if you go ahead and utilize those other tools, there's a great likelihood that the state is going to pay additional wages on top of that. So in essence, shooting yourself in the foot. I know it can be terribly complicated. And for most of you, you have a great claims manager that you can reach out to, that if you have questions. If you're not yet a member or a participant in our program, I strongly suggest you reach out to your third-party administrator and make sure you're doing it correctly, because when you utilize KOS, you want to do it correctly.
Thanks, Art. One of the things that's been helpful, certainly for me as we're having these conversations, is to, as I like to say, help the dollars and cents make sense. And so there's a few different categories that we can help to summarize the dollars and cents behind the use of kept on salary, because as Art just explained, kept on salary is really just exactly how it sounds. Chance for you as an employer to pay wages up front to keep L&I from doing that and to keep the claim status from going upside down on us. So the first way that we can think about the dollars and cents of kept on salary is this concept of paying some now so that you can save more later. That's one option. Another option is to pay nothing now, really let labor and industries make the payments for you, let insurance do what insurance does most of the time, but then ultimately making the choice to pay more later. And we'll talk about that more in detail as we go through. There's another option here, and we've got this italicized with some question marks. That's intentional, as if to say, like, not sure we really want to do that. We don't want you to pay now and pay more later. That unfortunately can happen sometimes, because especially when there's a case where it might not make sense to use kept on salary. Talk about that in a little bit greater detail. So the analogy or the metaphor that I use in my own mind that helps me again to make sense of the dollars and cents on kept on salary is this. So this is a true story. I was a young employee a couple decades ago, my first ever sort of true professional job, and my boss and I go out for coffee at the start of the workday. We're pulling into the coffee shop. He's got a large vehicle, and next to us is a brand new Audi. And he asked me, he's like, "Hey, am I going to clear that Audi as I'm pulling into the spot?" I said, "Dave, no, you're not. Please back out." Dave decides he's got room, pulls into the spot, and proceeds to hit that Audi and cause just a little bit of damage to it. And so we go into the coffee shop, we find the owner of the Audi, and the owner of the Audi says to Dave, my boss, he says, "Well, would you like to keep the cost of this claim off of your auto insurance?" And Dave says, "Well, actually, yes, I would." So they exchanged information. Dave ended up paying for the cost of that claim out of his pocket rather than letting insurance pay for it. And I asked him, I'm like, "Dave, what was that all about?" I didn't even realize that that was a thing, or you could do that. And more importantly, why? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just let your insurance pay for the claim? That's what insurance is for. Dave then explained to me, yes, I could let insurance pay for it, right? The second option, pay nothing now. But if I do that, I'm going to pay more later in the form of higher auto insurance premiums. So I'm taking, again, option one there. I'm going to choose to pay some now, pay for this claim out of my pocket up front, knowing that it's going to save me money down the road because my premiums aren't going to increase. So that's how we like to think of it. It's certainly helpful for me. Hopefully it's helpful for you as well. Another of the questions that's come up as we have these conversations is really why to use kept on salary, and it goes back to that previous slide that we were just on. One of the things that kept on salary can help us do is to really help make sure that the costs of our work comp claims don't get out of control. And in doing so, what that allows us to do is ultimately have a positive effect both on the experience modification factor, the EMF, and the premiums, and then retro as well if you're participating in a group or an individual retro. But thinking back to that chart that we showed you at the very beginning, that sort of mind-numbing chart, this is one of the levers that we have to really help make sure that our costs don't get out of control and that we use this tool when appropriate to really help make sure we're maximizing returns as well on the retro side. Another question that comes up for us is when to use kept on salary. Art, I always like how you describe this. Do you want to take this one over?
Sure. You know what? I like to think of KOS as sort of a bridge. You know, folks, you know that here in Washington, we have, as an employer, you have such a short time to respond to returning someone to some sort of transitional light duty. You know, there's often a delay in getting information from the attending physician. You know, we have to have a job description that's approved. Then we have to do a formal offer to the injured worker. It's really a lot of information that has to be shared and disseminated in a very short period of time. So I like to think of KOS as sort of you can utilize it as a bridge, and utilize it. You know, when those time frames are really tight, go ahead and apply that KOS to that specific claim scenario. Or perhaps for whatever reason, you folks don't have some sort of transitional light duty available. Maybe not now, but you could down the road. But if you don't, KOS is certainly a great opportunity to help mitigate those costs involved in the claims. And I think you're going to be really impressed to learn, as Dan gives us a further explanation moving forward, of just how much you could be saving. It doesn't seem like, well, 1 or 2 days of time loss, what does it really matter? Well, the costs really, there's a huge impact, and we'll talk about that. So when do you use light duty? Use it early, use it often, and, you know, quite frankly, you can use it probably longer than you've ever thought. So we'll get into the details moving forward. But you know what? There are times, as we mentioned earlier, that, you know, maybe KOS doesn't pencil out. You know, from a financial standpoint, there's lots of scenarios, and we're going to talk about those today, that where it just doesn't pencil out. And, you know, there is a little bit of the differentiate in our program. You know, our program, we don't mandate it. And you certainly don't want to use KOS as a mandate just because the retro group tells you it's going to be great. Just do it. You'll save some money. Can't tell you exactly how much, but it's better for you. But the reality of it is, it makes sense up to a certain point. So the reality of it is, it makes sense, but just not in every scenario. We're going to talk about some of those as we move on.
Yeah, thanks, Art. So we've done just a little bit of the sort of 30,000 foot flyover, if you will, and really what we're going to do, if we kind of continue that airline analogy, I would say maybe fasten your seatbelts, put your tray tables in the upright position, because we're going to head now on the descent and really do a deep dive. So we've got an in-house expert in the form of our own Dan Beatty, who's the VP and executive in charge of our work comp and retro programs. So take just a little bit of a deeper dive here on some of these high-level concepts that Art and I have talked about.
Thanks, Brian. I'm kind of excited to dive in. So, you know, as you all have heard kind of what KOS is, let's talk about when, why, and how it actually impacts individual member companies, so what it does and when. But before we dive into this particular slide, you know, Art alluded to kind of the perils that come with broadly applied mandates around kept on salary, or really anything in how you run your business or manage your claims. Part of that is because each individual claim is unique in and of itself, and each injured worker is unique, and each of your companies is unique to your company. And so broadly applying a claims management strategy that should be used strategically and intentionally is oftentimes ineffective, and oftentimes comes at the expense of the company that's deploying it. So as we think about this, just generally, we understand there's nuances for you and your business. There's nuances for you and that injured worker as we navigate all of this. the analysis that we do for our members is really agnostic to emotion and all of the other factors that need to come into play for you to make an effective kept on salary decision. What we're doing is providing the dollars and cents of these types of decisions. Right, you know your business, you know your people, you know your culture better than we do. So we want to work with you to make the right decision for you. But really, what we want to do is help you understand the magnitude of that decision for good or ill prior to you making it. I don't want you making blind decisions around kept on salary, as Brian alluded to, kind of off the top. What we want to do is make the most informed decision possible. And so as we go through here and kind of explain why KOS works, what the mechanism for the improvement in the premium is, and then we'll run through some claim examples and some break-even analysis too, as we dive into this. But the primary piece of kind of that giant head-scratching slide that KOS impacts is the costs on a particular claim. So we're taking those costs out of L&I's authority. We're taking on those dollars. That reduces the overall claim costs. It's going to get us some incentives we'll talk about in a little bit. But what that does is it influences your EMF. And for those of you that don't know what the EMF is, it's really just a multiplier on the base rates set by L&I each calendar year. As Brian mentioned, we're focusing on the things we can control here. One of the things that we cannot control is the base rate. One of the things we can control is our experience factor to an extent. So as that multiplier applies in this example here, you see an EMF of under 1, we're actually going to see a bit of a reduction, a bit of a savings on that base rate. The base rates apply per worker hour. So depending on how many hours you're running through your particular company in a particular risk class code, you could be getting a really significant monetary discount, even if the EMF is, in this case, down, 9% relative to average. So the way that KOS impacts the EMF is that it controls the actual loss piece. And the actual loss piece is the numerator in the EMF formula. We've simplified this a little bit, but conceptually, this is kind of how it works, is the EMF is a comparison of your actual losses versus your expected losses. So the expected losses, again, we can't really control that. That's based on the number of hours that you report on a quarterly basis. It's based on the risk class codes you report them in, so that the line of business that you're in. And it's set by the department. Where you do have influence is those actual losses. So we want as small a numerator in this equation as possible. So in this example here, we have an EMF of 0.8. The inverse would also be true. If we had actual losses that exceeded expected losses, we'd see an EMF above 1. So really, to the extent you outperform the expectations of labor and industries, you're going to get a bit of a discount on that EMF, and that flows all the way through to the premium that you pay. This is all just the premium side. We'll get into the retro impacts in a little bit. Fortunately, the department aligns incentives there. So to the extent that we can lower premium by reducing the EMF, usually the retro refund is going to go up too, because the same behaviors are going to get us similar rewards.
So Dan, if I was going to translate this, if your EMF is under 1, you're getting a discount on your insurance. And if it's over 1, you're paying a surcharge.
Yeah, that's right. And the monopolistic kind of, I'll call it an insurance scheme because it's just generally what we would refer to this as, is, the benefit is fixed across the state. So it doesn't matter what you pay. Your employees in your organization don't get more or less benefit in a monopolistic system like this. So, there's really no sense in paying more to get the same thing as your competitor who might be paying less for it. So if we can really focus on driving down that EMF in a way that's responsible for the company, then that's in their best interest, because now they're getting more for their money rather than less. So as we think about the actual loss piece, it's a combination of 3 years of claims. So the reason that this is important is really twofold. The first is this is going to be a lagging indicator of performance, right? So your EMF is always going to be going well back in time. You're going to be paying for the sins of the past. In 2023, you're being penalized still for claims that happened as far back as July 1st of 2018. So a really significant amount of time has passed between those claims and now. As we think about claims that are happening right now, so if you have a claim that happens this afternoon, knock on wood, we don't want it to, but you wouldn't start to feel the impact of that claim, good or bad, or the particular strategy that you employ in that claim until 2026, but it would stick with you in 26, 27, and 28. So there's a 3-year window where you're going to recognize the windfall of good claims management decisions, or you're going to recognize the headwind from increased costs there. The other reason that this is important is because what we don't want to have happen is for you to get into 26 and 27 and go, well, what happened? Why can't we? Why is our EMF up? Why are we paying more in premium? Well, at that point, your goose is cooked. It's been a lot of years, and the mechanisms that we have available to us to positively influence claim costs are really significantly restricted after that amount of time. So making the right decisions today on a particular claim is going to positively influence outcomes for you in the future. We don't want any surprises for the folks we work with here.
Dan, you'd be surprised when I'm out and about and talking with employers, they really have no idea why their rates went up as much as they did. And the reality of it is it's the sins of the past that brought us to this point. And so that's a great explanation.
Yeah, that's and we don't want there to be surprises. So to the extent, is you'll see here too, all the claims for 2024 and 2025 in your EMF, they've already happened. So we're having conversations with the folks that we work with on an ongoing basis, say, hey, here's what's coming down the pike, right? Here's what you can expect moving forward. And the claim that's happening right now, is going to impact you in 2026. We want to help you understand the magnitude of those consequences too. And claims that we're managing that are in the 22-23 plan year that are going to start impacting the 2025 EMF. We want to understand exactly what's at play. We don't want to rely on the department's early case reserve computer algorithm that's woefully inadequate. What we want to do is really accurately project the cost of those claims so we can help our members have the most accurate information possible to make the decision for their business and their people.
So Dan, it sounds like my commitment to good performance now and good strategic claims management now is an investment in the future of the premiums that I'll pay a few years down the road.
Yeah, that's right. And as you mentioned on that fender bender slide, right, there are scenarios where you can pay a kept on salary right now and still end up not breaking even on that in the 3 years that it sits in your EMF calculation. So you could pay some now, and then in those scenarios, pay more over the course of the 3 years that claim sticks with you too. We want to help member companies avoid that. So this is an example that kind of runs through what happens in a particular type of claim. And really, I'm going to bucket claims into kind of 2 buckets. These are the primary buckets that L&I thinks of when they categorize claims, and that's compensable and non-compensable. So a compensable claim is any claim that has any dollars paid by L&I other than medical costs. So that could be disability payments, time loss payments, loss of earning power, any miscellaneous kind of travel payments, things like that. That's going to automatically flip the claim from non-compensable to compensable. So that means that a non-compensable claim is just where only medical costs are covered. So just some treatment costs, the department is paying that, and there's no other payments that would flip that to the compensable category. The reason these two buckets are important is because of how they're treated both from the premium and the EMF standpoint, and then also on the retro side. And this is where we're going to start to kind of talk about the positive impact of both. Keeping claims non-compensable for your EMF and keeping claims non-compensable for your retro refund. So you see kind of in those gray boxes there, you do get a discount that the department gives you in your EMF calculation for non-compensable claims. In 2023, that number is $3,570. It's going up to $3,670 in 2024. But the way that plays out is just to the right there. In a compensable claim with $10,000 of medical costs and $5,000 of time loss, the department is going to charge you for all 15,000 of those dollars. So that rolls into your numerator in that EMF calculator. For 3 years, that's going to sit there. Now, if that claim is kept non-compensable, so you've taken the $5,000 out of L&I's authority, you've taken care of paying your employee, you're going to pay more because you don't get to reduce that like they do for time loss payments. But we factor all of that in as we go through here. So you've taken that $5,000 out. Now you're looking at a $10,000 medical claim. Well, you're going to get that medical only discount because the claim's non-compensable. So now instead of a $15,000 claim rolling into your EMF calculation for 3 years, you have one that's $6,330. So less than half that's going to count against you for those 3 years, which is wonderful. As we go down a little bit onto the retro side, the department has some additional mechanisms that they deploy as it pertains to retro calculations. We'll call those development factors, which are really just another multiplier on claim costs. And that only applies if you're in a retro environment. If you're like, you work with a lot of members that are self-insured, that are in an individual retro and a non-retro environment, the math is going to change if you're self-insured here. The incentive structure is a little bit different. But if you've got questions about that, I'd be more than happy to walk through that with you after we're done with this, maybe separately. The same if you're in the state fund, you're still going to get the EMF benefit, but you're not going to get the retro benefit because you're not a retro participant. If you are a retro participant, either individual or group retro, you're going to see lower development factors on non-compensable claims, which is less of a penalty to you. So, again, less than half of those dollars are being charged against you in a non-compensable claim than they are compared to a compensable claim. So really, the short story here is the department is just exceedingly punitive in their treatment of compensable claims. If you have the ability to control whether or not a claim is compensable or non-compensable, you're well served in many cases to ensure that it stays non-compensable. Now, there are some caveats to that we will look at. And we want to make sure that we're balancing the dollars that you have to spend against the dollars that you will save in premium. And we'll look at a couple examples of that as we go through here. But that's kind of the general overview of how that math in these types of scenarios works.
So Dan, let me just to recap on that.
Yeah.
So compensable, really, the translation of that is a claim where dollars are paid directly to the injured worker.
That's right.
Right? And so compensable claims, more expensive, non-compensable, less expensive.
Yeah, if you had to summarize it into hand gestures, it would be non-compensable, good, compensable, bad.
Got it.
And as I mentioned too, we'll look at a couple claim examples here where we're essentially making the same decision, which is to take away the time loss from the department, make these claims non-compensable. These are very different situations. One of them, as Art alluded to earlier, this is a 1-day time loss claim on the left here. The next one is significantly more. To my point that each claim is unique and different, right? The analysis that comes with each claim as you make strategic decisions ought to be unique and different too. And you can clearly see in both of these cases, though, right, what happens is by taking that time loss away from the department, by paying that injured worker, kept on salary, the company is coming out net ahead. In the first example, really, really significantly. You see there in the middle of that table, they're paying $220 in kept on salary wages to save $28,437 in premiums over the 3 years that rolls into your EMF. So if somebody knocked on my door and said, write me a check for 220 and I'll hand you 28,000 bucks, I'd go, great. That sounds like a really, really good deal. And again, this is something where we have to know the rules of L&I's game so we know when we can beat them at their game, right? And as I mentioned, there's a lot of other factors that are going to come into this. This is purely the dollars and cents piece of it, but it's really helpful sometimes because what we found with member companies is the emotion behind paying someone not to work is real, and that's hard to overcome sometimes. And numbers like this are pretty powerful in helping folks overcome that kind of initial emotional response that I will admit I am prone to as well. The important thing to remember. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I was just in my own mind thinking back to the fender bender analogy, and if I'm reading the example on the small time loss chart on the left-hand side correctly, I could pay $220 out of my own pocket to have the damage on that Audi fixed, and in doing so, save about $28,200 in future premiums.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And let's say you didn't hit an Audi, right? Let's move to the example on the right. Let's say you hit a Maserati. Right? Well, you're going to pay a lot more out of pocket for that one, right? In this example, right, there's almost $33,000 of kept on salary wages that the employer's going to pay. That hurts. You're writing checks for $33,000 while your injured worker is not working. You're still in this example, and the member company is coming out net ahead almost $20,000. Mm-hmm. So even though it's a bigger chunk of checks, the savings are still significant. It's really important to, one of the objections that I've alluded to is paying people not to work. We don't pay people not to work, and I've heard that, and that's a legitimate reaction. The helpful thing as I think through this is you're going to pay them. You're going to pay for them not to work. It's a matter of whose name is on the check and how big it's going to be, right? You're either going to pay L&I more later, or you're going to pay your injured worker less now. And that's really the decision that you get to make as we look at these types of scenarios that helps kind of remove some of that emotion from these decisions. Now, as we have all alluded to, and even directly said, kept on salary is not always going to make sense for the company. And in this example here, what we're going to see is it not making sense, where they're going to come out on the wrong side of this on a net basis. That's because there's a disability payment that loses them the claims free or the medical only discount that happens when you keep a claim non-compensable. This is the type of information that we want member companies, we want companies we work with to understand so that you can make a decision and the consequences, right? If you need to make a stand on principle to not pay somebody kept on salary. Let's say, for example, they have been terminated and file a claim a couple days later, because that never happens. The likelihood that you have a high desire to pay them kept on salary in that scenario is probably pretty low. And that's fine. We want you to understand whether or not you're going to come out on the right side or wrong side of that financially, and then let you make that decision. Same is true if you've got injured workers that fail UAs and things like that, right? There's a lot of factors that play into these types of decisions, not the least of which is the money. And we're not going to manipulate these numbers in a way that makes it look rosier than it is. right? We want to be really, really honest and clear. We're employer advocates, not retro sponsor advocates, right? We're going to make sure that you're in the best position that you can be to make the most informed decision for your people and your company. And kept on salary is always going to be good for the retro refund collectively. It's not always going to be good for the individual company that's paying those kept on salary wages, as you see right here. So all that to say, broadly applying a strategy to nuanced and unique situations is not typically the best way to approach it. The other thing I'll add as we look at these types of things too is, the tenacity with which you're going to continue to try and push, and your vigilant claims manager is going to continue to try and push this claim toward closure is only going to increase as you're paying this kept on salary, because those are your dollars, right? So we really want to make sure that we're driving these things to closure, not punting on them until the mandate ends on a particular claim.
Dan, it's funny that, it's not funny, it's sad, actually. I just was talking with a really nice employer this morning that doesn't have a third-party administrator, and they had an injury where an individual bumped his shin, and basically decided didn't want to see the doctor. And so they had him fill out a form saying, whenever you need to, you can go to a doctor and have a claim filed. He chose a couple weeks later to go to the doctor on his own, and doctor took him off work for 3 days. And the department went ahead and paid 3 days of time loss. And he was so beside himself, said, we've gone over 500 days without a time loss injury. And boy, now we got to start over. And I said, were you not aware of kept on salary option for you? That's 3 days. I said, you'd be surprised the money you're going to save. He says, no one ever told me about that. The state claims manager never told me about that. So hopefully that individual is on this lunch and learn, and it's going to get some good information.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go too far down the L&I rabbit trail here a little bit, but to the L&I claims manager, L&I is not going to lose money, right? They pay time loss. They're just going to charge the employer for it later through the spike in the EMF. They don't have to care. Their incentives are not aligned with the company's incentives. And so, if we can kind of keep as much control over that claim and the direction that it's going to go, that's going to serve the employer much, much better than to let L&I kind of sit from the passenger seat, reach over and try and grab that steering wheel with time loss payments. We don't want that to happen. So this also lets us kind of stay in control of the direction of that claim for a little bit longer. So we look at the individual analysis. One of the things that we also do to help folks kind of navigate this, and this is something that Brian and Art will talk a little bit about in a minute, is this kind of broad break-even analysis, where we want to help member companies understand how long the runway is in an average scenario. This is tailored to each person that we do this for. In this example, we're assuming a 40-hour work week and $25 an hour. We're going to incorporate the retro refund impact for those companies that are in our group retro program. But really, this is a pretty high level for folks to go, oh, I do actually have a little bit longer than I thought to run this. But, if you're looking at 70 days, 176 is a really stinking long time. We're probably not going to advocate for that. But knowing where your break even is on a particular example is going to be really, really helpful as we project out the financial implications of a decision, right? So if we're looking at a claim right off the top and we think they're going to be out for 250 days, maybe because it's a bad injury, they're going to have multiple surgeries, and we don't have the availability of light duty based on their restrictions, right? Well, knowing it's going to be 250 days, knowing the break even's 176 is really helpful in the decision that we make on day 3 of that claim. So being able to intelligently project the cost of a claim and the trajectory of that claim is critical as we think about this kind of stuff. And this kind of serves as a general guideline and map for us as we navigate those types of things.
No, Dan, I
So
was thinking about a couple of the things that we had identified up front, which is really that oftentimes decision making around things like kept on salary will be a little bit randomized. And, that's no one's fault. That might just be for lack of better information. But I think of a lot of the conversations that we've had, and when I hear about employers' tolerance for time frames of kept on salary, I'll hear numbers like a week or 30 or 60 or 90 days. And there's really no ability on the employer part to identify why or how they came up with that number. It's just, whatever felt right, which again, no fault of their own, is certainly if they don't have information like this. But what I'm seeing here is that more than likely, even that farthest number that we tend to hear, which is sometimes up to 90 days, could still be well short of the actual runway that's available if it's needed.
yeah, exactly.
Good stuff. Well, hey, Dan, you've done a lot to help us kind of navigate the dollars and cents and really explain how the math works and how we can use it in our favor. One of the things I'd love to maybe have you transition to is the experience that you've had as the executive in charge of this program in talking with our members who have made decisions who previously were not making decisions to use something like kept on salary and the impact that that's had, both for them individually, but maybe more so for our group in general, because I know you've had some pretty exciting revelations as of late in terms of group performance and the impact that KOS has had.
Yeah, this is something where we've been talking with member companies now as we've developed and worked with folks to develop this ability and this specificity in these claims decisions, right? Really for the last several years. And, as I mentioned, kind of off the top, right, as we were looking at the EMF being a lagging indicator, what we're starting to see now for those member companies that we were working with maybe 2 or even 3 years ago is they're starting to see the impacts, the positive impacts of really rolling this out, rolling kept on salary out in a more strategic and broadly applied manner. So, that's not to say that there weren't objections. Some of these companies we'd worked with, for 2 years before they went, okay, let's pilot this and see if it works. And that's because there's real concerns around the people that are involved, the culture of the particular location that might be involved. There's, oftentimes there's union pressure for organizations that have, operations that are outside of Washington, maybe that are served by the same union, things like that, that are going to come into play. So there's real legitimate concerns. One of the concerns that we have heard is, gee, if my worker is hurt and I pay their salary for a week, right, and then they come back, won't they just tell everybody else? And then all of a sudden, everybody else is taking a long weekend to go fishing, which, don't get me wrong, I'm in support of long fishing weekends, right? But we don't want to do that at the expense of the employer. What we've seen in those cases is we're actually seeing lower claim count from the member companies that have done this. We're not seeing claims drag on. That's one of the other concerns we've heard is, golly, my injured worker is not going to, come back to work if they're getting paid their full salary to sit at home on the couch. That's again a legitimate concern and one that we keep a really, really close eye on with these companies that are doing this. We've not seen that happen. In fact, we've seen the opposite happen. Across the group of companies that we've been working with, we've seen a 71% reduction in claim duration, average claim duration, which is astonishing. Because what we're seeing actually happen is those injured workers are coming back more engaged and quickly because they feel like their employer cares for them. And that's something that I can't put into a spreadsheet as much as I'd like to. That's my happy place. I can't do that. I can show you a 71% reduction in average claim duration. What we're seeing also on the EMF side, I mentioned we're starting now to see that drop. is an average decrease of 15% in the EMF for those member companies, which is significant and really just the tip of that iceberg, right? We're going to start to see that accelerate over the next couple of years as more and more of those claims that were positively impacted by this roll into the EMF. And that translates to, in our group, over the last 2 years, we've seen almost a 70% increase in member companies that are enjoying the claims-free discounts. They're getting the lowest EMF they possibly can from the state. So really significant and meaningful financial benefits to our member companies. And it's important here too to note that while this has been true, on an aggregate basis across our group and across the companies that we've done this with, this is not always going to be true on every single claim. And that's why, again, we don't mandate this to you. We want you to be able to deploy kept on salary when it makes sense for your company and your injured worker. In the event that we feel like somebody's trying to take advantage of this, dragging out the claim, we're not really necessarily pushing it to closure. They're staying at home. They're not engaging with treatment. Those are opportunities that you have based on the individual nuance of that claim to pull this benefit. And we just want you to understand the financial implications of that decision again as you do that. And so, this is fun to look at on a holistic level, and I like it. Right? It's really, really good for the retro. It's really good for this group of companies. But that's not to say that this is going to apply perfectly across every single claim. So we want you to have that flexibility. We want you to be empowered to make the decision that's best for your organization, your people.
Dan, I just have to add, I have so many conversations with, company executives and HR managers, and, it's all about employee engagement. And, what we found is that, companies that have deployed some KOS, they're doing the right things for the right reasons, and the employees know it. And that spreads through the facility like wildfire. And when you're doing the right things for the right reasons, you're increasing employee engagement. And an engaged employee gives you that discretionary effort where increased productivity. So there's all sorts of intangibles that you alluded to, but I'm hearing it day in and day out.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Good stuff. Well, Dan, again, thank you. You've given us a lot of information, and we always find that it's helpful to really be able to summarize what the high points are. And as we've talked about today, the reasons why to use kept on salary, well, we go all the way back again to that initial chart that we looked at. This is one of the levers that we have to control to help keep our claim costs down, which ultimately lowers our premiums and increases our retro returns. As far as when to use it, what we really want to help our members do, and what Dan has just outlined for a lot of the conversations that he's had, is that the earlier and the more often you're using this, it's going to make sense. And we want to be able to kind of help flip the script, right? So a lot of times it's like, well, why should I? But really what it comes to with KOS is, why shouldn't I? Is this one of those rare occasions where it might not make sense? Because more often than not, it probably will. And as far as when not, again, there's going to be those rare occasions. Dan, you've outlined a lot of those for us. If it doesn't make sense for you on a financial basis, we've got the ability to tell you that. And just like Dan said, we are never going to force you to do something that you don't want to do because it doesn't make sense financially, or even if there might be other reasons as well. We really want to leave this decision in your hands. That's what we do as employer advocates. We started today with the idea of conversations, right? It was conversations that led us to this webinar today, and it's going to be those continued conversations that help us to give you the information that you need to continue to make the best possible decisions when it comes to the use of kept on salary. So the conversations are always beneficial, especially when there's maybe a question in your mind as to whether or not KOS makes sense for a certain claim. So having said all of that, Dan alluded to the break-even analysis, and we want to make sure that you have this tool in your hands. So if you're not a Vigilant member, we've included the link here. Don't feel like you have to copy this down. We will send you a copy of this presentation. You can also find the electronically fillable form on our website. If you are a Vigilant member, and a lot of you are, go ahead and send Dan an email and we can make sure that you've got this tool in your hand if you don't already have it. So having said all of that, we've got just a few minutes left. We did promise to end on time, but I'd love it if we can field maybe just one or two questions that might come in through the question and answer. So we'll take the last 3 or 4 minutes here to do just that. If you've got your keyboard handy, feel free to use that Q&A, and we'll start to field some of these questions. Art, do you maybe want to keep an eye on those and feed one or two of those questions to Dan?
Sure. Well, I have a question here. It came in. When not to use KOS? Referenced a failed UA. Why?
Yeah, that's a good question, a nuanced one. And one that when it comes up, as Art and Brian mentioned off the top, one of the things that's available to members of Vigilant is access to an employment attorney. We usually involve them in a particular discussion around something like this because there's a lot of different factors that we need to take into account. One of the things where we talk about member companies maybe not wanting to use kept on salary in this scenario is if there's a post-accident UA and they are positive, then there might be part of the employee agreement, part of the company handbook, things like that, where a positive UA means you don't get to come back, you're not rehired, maybe they were on a last chance agreement of some kind, things like that. So in that case, right, giving someone their salary when there's not an opportunity for them to come back to work might go kind of sideways for you. We want you to be able to make that decision as each of those kind of come up. Fortunately, that's a pretty rare one. We've also had some where there's an injury, they have a policy for a post-accident UA. The results take a long time to get back. In the meantime, they can't come back to work because company policy says you can't come back to work until your UA comes back negative. So they could be out of work for upwards of a week. Well, the department, because it's post-accident and the time out of work is related to the industrial injury, the department is going to pay that week as time loss. You'll have the option to pay that week as kept on salary, but some folks are going to choose not to because they're waiting, or they're going to make that contingent on the result of the UA when it does come back. So that's a really, really good question, and one, as Brian mentioned a couple times, that really would be best had with some specifics around a conversation with the employment attorney involved.
Dan, I think we have one more question that just came in. I think it's looking for some confirmation. It says, when we use KOS, we do not follow the same rule of thumb as L&I. No KOS if only 3 or less days off after the date of injury. Is this good? Is this good for us to do?
Yeah, so kept on salary is really a strategy to keep the department from paying time loss. So if the department is not going to pay time loss anyway, then we don't need to deploy that. Now, if the department may not pay those first 3 days, even if they're out of work for 7, right? Because they're not out of work for 14, where that first 3 days gets retroactively paid. You still have to, in that situation, pay for those first 3 days. So there's a couple different nuances that are going to happen in that particular situation too. But generally, if the department would not otherwise pay time loss, kept on salary is an unnecessary tool to use.
So this is a follow-up with another employer. If the employee gets an injury and they went to the doctor that day, will the employer pay for KOS on the date of injury? ?
Yeah, again, depends on the duration of the time out of work is really the answer there. And so that's something where your vigilant claims manager is going to work with you based on the anticipated duration of that time out of work, and then make some strategic recommendations with those assumptions in mind. Because the strategy that you deploy on day 1 could be different than the strategy you need to deploy on day 15 if all of a sudden, oh, that's not a sprained knuckle, that's a broken finger, and they're going to have to go have that reset. Well, okay, now we want to relook at the assumptions that we've made as new medical comes in or things like that. So really dependent on the duration of time out of work.
So just to recap, so an employer can have the opportunity to, in retrospect, to look back to see if it makes sense and then go ahead and pay that.
Yeah, that's right. So this is something where you could have an injured worker out for, let's say, 10 days, right? And they come back to work. You've got another payroll cycle coming up. You go, well, okay, does it make sense for us to go retroactively pay that kept on salary before the department pays that time loss? There's some cases where the department has even paid time loss and we've gone back and said, no, our intent is to pay kept on salary, and they've allowed that. There's, again, some nuance around when they will allow that and how the time loss payment is made, how long has gone on, or how much time has progressed since the time loss payment was made too. Do you have protest rights, things like that are going to happen in a particular claim?
Well, looks like we've run just a little bit over, but there was one question. We'll go ahead and answer that one offline.
Sounds good. Well, for those of you that have asked, we do have some SHRM credits available for you. We've got the link here at the end of the slideshow that we'll be able to send out to everyone and make sure that you've got access to that. And we'll also make sure that everybody has both the activity code there. And again, you won't have to copy that down. We'll send it out to you for the SHRM credits. And then finally, if there are any questions, you'll have contact information for both Art and myself. We'd love to be able to help answer some of these questions that we weren't able to get to offline. And again, really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you, and we'll look forward to doing this again in the future. Take good care, everyone.
Bye-bye.